my team?
Sure. We're going.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for making time. I was looking around the Inspiral website and I was looking through the list of people involved, and your name did jump out at me, but I figured rather than reaching out to you directly, I would kind of go through the contact form and see what happened. But I was really happy to see that I ended up in your inbox anyway. And I really enjoyed listening to that episode that you shared with me. And I've then also been reading a few of those Medium articles that were mentioned on the show as well. So I've been digging in a little bit, but really the reason I reached out to Inspiral in the first place is because in my experience so far, they kind of represent the best example of what one dimension of what I feel like I and my co-conspirators are working towards, which is this kind of self-organizing, decentralized collective of people who form some kind of a hybrid of a community and a working collective and a group of friends, and everybody is sort of working towards a more or less similar, or at least kind of aligned sense of mission to do good in the world. But within that, there's quite a diverse spectrum of what that means for different people and different little clusters and things like that. I have, just by way of background, I've been involved in the sort of Ken Wilber integral theory world for about a decade. And through that was introduced to Frederick Laloux's work with reinventing organizations and holacracy and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, that sort of like teal organization world is kind of how I got to Inspiral and Lumio. I used to volunteer for the website Enlivening Edge. I think you probably know them. So yeah, that's a little bit of my relevant background. And then, so before I kind of dig too deep into my project, I guess, yeah, I was like really inspired by a bunch of the things that I heard and read from you. So I have some notes that maybe could be useful places to start. But basically, I've been working with my co-founder for about 2.5 years now. And we're building what we usually refer to as a community of practice. And the idea, the basic idea, and I didn't send you anything ahead of time, but I do have a short like slide deck that I could run you through if that seems helpful. But the basic idea is like, we live at this threshold moment, you know. There are certainly a kind of spectrum of possible futures ahead of us, but when we boil it down, I think the gist of it is like, if we kind of keep going the way we've been going, it's going to end very badly. But at the same time, that pressure is like bringing a lot of amazing possibilities to the surface. And if we can kind of get our shit together in time, we also have the chance to build something really amazing, right? And kind of like launch into our next phase of development. So what's needed to kind of like steer that process in the right direction, right? And my theory on that for a while has been a couple of things. One is what's needed is an evolution of consciousness. That's the fundamental thing, like this kind of Albert Einstein quote of, you know, can't solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them. And also just my background of like integral theory and spiral dynamics, and taking on the belief that there is this next stage of consciousness emerging in humanity. And there's the question of like whether sort of the tipping point will be reached in time, you know? So how do we sort of support people to intentionally evolve their consciousness through deliberate practice, basically, right? So using, from that question, we've got a kind of a framework around what that could look like and how we could do that. And then a second piece is that needs to happen in communities of practice. And I draw there from Margaret Wheatley's work at the Berkana Institute, and this notion that, there's a kind of growing movement of individuals around the world who are waking up to this way of seeing things. So how do you create spaces for those people to come together, be in community, develop these new set of practices, really sort of ground themselves in this new way of being? And then if you get enough of those little pods around the world, those small pods of a smallish number of people have a big ripple effect, and suddenly the whole system can upgrade itself, right? So that's another piece. And then I think the third piece for me is that one of the big shifts that we're navigating is from this kind of like, I'm a big fan of Charles Eisenstein's work, if you're familiar with him. So from this kind of like separation-based, hyper-individualistic, fragmented worldview to something much more rooted in collective intelligence, and getting back to sort of our relational nature, right? And so, the communities of practice are not just support spaces for the individuals, but they're really creating the soil from which new forms of culture will emerge out of that shared creative space that cannot emerge from any one individual's amazing brilliance. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of the model. And I'll just say one last thing and then pause, which is that at this stage in our game, we feel really good about like the sort of content and the experience that we've been providing for people. And we've attracted a growing number of folks, both at sort of like the core team level, where we've now gone from 2 to like 10, and at the sort of community level, where we've got a list of about 50 or so people around the world. And, I think we're poised to potentially expand that, but we want to do that at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons, And so one of the things that, so basically I was like going to Inspiral to kind of be like, how do we do this? How do we grow our little thing to its next stage of growth in a way that is in alignment with our values and our principles, and is we want to build the thing in a way that reflects where we're trying to go with it, right? So not just rely on our sort of old ways of doing and end up like recreating the same nonsense, right? But really leaning into what would it be like to create an organization from that consciousness, right? So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to pause.
So it's exciting. Yeah. It's so sweet to meet another cousin,
Yeah.
This is my job. A lot of my job lately is I just get to meet people like you that are doing this, and it's like, oh, another one, great, awesome. That's not to devalue it. That's to say, like, there's something happening here,
Yeah, and that's another thing I heard you mention in the podcast, which is one piece I would love to talk more with you about, because my sense is that you do know a lot of people like this, and you mentioned kind of the importance of peer-to-peer learning and how these different little clusters can potentially support each other. So I'm very interested in that as a thread of this conversation as well.
Can you tell me a bit about what kind of experiences you've been providing for people so far?
Sure. So we started with basically like inviting friends and friends of friends to gather in person in New York City. This was in 2018. And so my co-founder and I both have if I can sort of mush us together, we both have a background in a little bit of like social change work, a little bit of like spiritual practice, a little bit of community building, a little bit of training, coaching, facilitation. So that's kind of our mix of skills and experiences that we're bringing. And so we invited people who, you know, generally more or less are in those worlds in some way or another. And we would design facilitated, we kind of call them workshops, but I don't fully like that. It's not really the right term. It was more like experiential inquiries, exploring where and how our individual transformation journey intersects with these sort of broader social issues and social change, right? So kind of based on this premise that our inner work and our outer work are not separate, right? If we really want to be an effective social change agent, we have to shine the light of awareness on our own inner landscape and really be conscious of where we're coming from and how we're showing up in those change efforts, right? And conversely, if we, you know, authentically engage in social change work, that's going to be transformational for us, right? We will change and evolve and be challenged and all of that stuff, right? So holding those as like non-separate from the start, and then engaging in a kind of like, how do we do this? What do we need to do as individuals and as a community to really have the impact and create the change that we believe is needed, right? So do you want like more detail than that, as far as like we've, you know, gathered for maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours, and we would kind of do like sit in a circle and check in and have like an experience and then talk about it. So it's that kind of thing.
I like that stuff. That's good.
Yeah.
And are there other, besides meeting as a whole group, do you do other stuff?
So, okay, so we did that for about 9 months in 2018. We also did one weekend retreat, which was really great. That was kind of like a deep dive. And I would say that that experience really cohered the initial like core group, you know, that really kind of like took things to another level. And then by the end of that year, we felt really confident about, you know, that we had something useful, right? And we were thinking about what else we could do with that. We were also thinking about how to start earning some money and yeah, just kind of like directions to go in. And so in 2019, we pivoted more to like a professional coaching consulting kind of direction. And the two main things that led to were my co-founder and I both served in Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence coach training program as what they call meta coaches, which means we were brought in as experienced coaches to help support, mentor, supervise like participants in the training program, right? So that was about a year process, which we wrapped up in April. So now we're both certified emotional intelligence coaches. And the other big thing was that we did end up working with 3 consulting clients in the fall of 2019. We worked with Johnson & Johnson. We worked with a cohort of 40 of their global young leaders, like recent hires, who were on a sort of fast track, you know, like a very specific leadership development sort of pipeline in their supply chain division. And they brought us in. The theme of our workshop was like innovation as a way of being. So how do you kind of embody the principles of adaptability and resilience and responsiveness to be a creative agent within, first of all, an organizational structure that sometimes is full of habits and old structures and bureaucracies and things like that, but also in this broader context of massive complexity and disruption and constant kind of rethinking strategy and all this kind of stuff, right? So that was one. And then we also worked with a fast growing cybersecurity firm that had recently been acquired, and a lot of their sort of they were basically like hackers. Really, really smart, but really, really techie people. And suddenly they were finding themselves having to like manage and mentor new hires. And so they brought us in to kind of help them become better coach, mentor, supervisors from like an emotional intelligence perspective, but also to help them build out the infrastructure for a mentor training program that they could then like run ongoingly. And then we had one more. So
what's the connection between, like, how does the consulting gig relate to this wider community?
Well, so we kind of paused the community and dove really deep into this consulting world for like 6 months, took up all our time,
Yeah.
And then all that ended basically at the end of 2019. And then we were in dialogue with 2 of the 3 clients to continue working together. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, pause, step back, re-strategize. And my co-founder and I at that time had also kind of come back to the fact that in our hearts, what we really most wanted to be doing was the community of practice stuff. The consulting stuff was fun, it was cool, paid good money, all this kind of good stuff. But really in our hearts, we were like, it's really about the community. So we decided we were going to try to pick that up again, but we wanted to do it globally, not just New York based. I don't live in New York. By this time, my co-founder had also moved out of New York. So, and it was COVID. So we were like, okay, now's a good time. Let's do some Zoom calls and invite our people from around the world. So since then, we've been doing every other Saturday, 90-minute calls, similar type of experience to what we were doing in New York, similar types of themes. And it's kind of been a mix of like my co-founder and I designing and facilitating. Sometimes we'll invite one of our community members in to guest facilitate something that's alive for them, that they have some skill and interest in. Sometimes we just kind of hold space for people to process what's going on when like big news drops and things are really like, whoa. So yeah, that's kind of the vibe. And then in this last, like currently right now, since the beginning of fall, we've also been prototyping some other offerings. One is like a 6-month course, 6 week, like 6 sessions course about systems constellations, like family systems, organizational systems, how you can work with that using constellations approach. One is a storytelling workshop for people who are interested in writing or podcasting, any kind of like creative media, self-expression type of thing. One is a Gen Z mentorship program. Part of our focus is really on support. Actually, a real core aspect of our DNA is on equipping next gen leaders to navigate the great transition, what we call it. So we have a handful of basically like college students who are part of our community. So we designed this mentorship program where we paired them up with other millennials. And so we've been running that. That's been really great. And then we also just recently started hosting a weekly contemplative practice dojo. So it's just like an hour Zoom call. Everybody can show up and do whatever type of practice they feel called to doing on their own, but in a group space. So yeah, those are some of the, we decided to run all of those offerings based on feedback we had been getting from our community members over the course of the few months prior. So one of the things I heard in your podcast that I really resonate with was just this like spirit of experimentation, And one thing that was actually helpful was to hear you say that you've been experimenting for 10 years. And it shifted something for me where I felt like, in the back of my mind, I had been holding some kind of a view that we were in this experimental phase and that we would sort of eventually find what works and then like not be in an experimental phase. And hearing you say that you've been experimenting for 10 years, I realized like, oh yeah, this is never going to end. This is just what it is. It's good to acknowledge, you know? But anyway, yeah, we this is the last thing I'll say and then I'll pause again. I don't know if you know the book, The Intergalactic Design Guide. Have you heard of that?
That's correct.
It's written by a woman called Cheryl Heller, and it's about what she calls social design, which is a kind of an adapted version of the design thinking process that is targeting like systems change. And it's really this kind of like human-centered approach of like, you know, you have to just go and talk to the people who are impacted by the system, who are participating in the system, and kind of like tease out the solution from this like crowdsourced field of data, you know, and let that emerge. So yeah, we've been trying to apply those principles and practices in the way that we're running the whole thing. So yeah.
So it sounds like that you and your co-founder are really driving a lot of like pouring in that activation energy to get the thing going. Eh?
Yeah, we have been for sure. And then, like I said, over the last couple of months, we've attracted a little team. And so recently we've been putting a lot of energy into like onboarding those people so that we can get to a place where we feel like we're all on the same page. And then we can move more into like collective decision making and you know, distributing the work basically, right? It's gotten, yeah, it's just we want to do too much for the two of us, you know. Yeah,
sometimes you've got the appetite though and you've got the energy to do it. It's like you can roll with it while it's rolling. So I mean, it sounds like I'm like, okay, you're in good shape, you know what you're doing. What are you sitting with that you feel uncertain about, or is like yeah, I'm trying to listen between the lines and hear what you're reaching for, you know, like what doesn't feel clear, or that you're like, yeah, that you feel like you need to call in some support on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I'll just name that, like, on one level, I just wanted to kind of meet and connect and know that we're both out there and see what kind of interesting possibilities might come just from that. So even that is good. Yeah, so let me just consider the possible directions. I think okay, I think maybe there's 3 things I could offer to kind of go deeper. One is that I appreciated the distinctions you made between these different like scales of the system, right? And I think that we are right now cohering the kind of like co-host team, right? The people who are like really building it on the back end. I think we've also got this group of like, let's say 30 people who are regularly, consistently engaging with our offerings and who kind of have a mutual understanding that they're part of our community, right? And so in this next phase, we're thinking about, we're kind of like coming to the end of this fall 2020 cycle of offerings, and then thinking about what is our next round of prototypes going to look like, and what is the objective of those prototypes. So I think one area to look at is how do we bring even more coherence and depth to that sphere of 30-ish people, right? And then beyond that, how might we start to grow from 30 to like something in the Dunbar range without sacrificing the things that have made the group of 30 really special so far, right? So those transitions and how to kind of like deepen and strengthen each of those? Like that's one place where I would be curious to hear any
cool.
thoughts you might have based on your experience. The second one is one of the things you said in the podcast, which I really resonated with, was sort of like, I'm going to paraphrase and probably misrepresent, so sorry. But basically, you're saying like, well, you know, people get together and they're really excited about like the alternative economic structures and like the social impact projects and like the, you know, creating cool products and services together and like all that stuff. But like at the end of the day, actually what it comes down to is like psychology and relationships, like being like learning how to relate to each other as humans differently than how we've been programmed, right? And I really agreed with that and believe that, and is kind of what I mean when I was talking about evolving consciousness and being in communities of practice together. I think we're kind of pointing at the same thing there. And so one kind of question slash idea I had was like, I feel like my co-founder and I and our community are really good. Like that's actually the thing we're focusing on, right? So do you see in your explorations and conversations that other groups of similar collectives could potentially use support on those levels, right? So, you know, I guess in terms of this kind of growing ecosystem of initiatives that are all kind of experimenting with similar ideas, maybe one role that we can play in this broader movement is like supporting groups like Inspiral. I'm not saying Inspiral specifically, I imagine you guys already do it pretty well, but other groups kind of like that with those like intrapersonal and interpersonal dynamics that are really foundational to making the whole thing work, but are also maybe sometimes like overlooked or not quite as well understood, or not sure how do we really do that, or those kind of things, right? So that's another point. And then the last thing I'll say is I loved a quote from that podcast. You said, what we need is millions of people ready to mobilize a group of people to work on their little patch, and that feel competent to do that and feel encouraged and supported to do that well, and that they're going to learn from each other. And you had a similar question in one of your posts. Can we create the conditions for many excellent crews to coalesce? So I think that's really the essence of our project. We're calling it the Emerging Leaders Project. And our whole impulse is like each of our community members is doing amazing work in their own right, in their own little patch of the world. So how do we be a place where those people can come, be resourced, be educated, be supported, to then go back out and like continue doing their thing even more effectively, right? So yeah, you recorded that podcast in April, and I'm just kind of curious to know like what you're seeing around that, and yeah, like if you have any kind of tips, suggestions, ideas. I don't know, like that really spoke to me as in terms of how I think about what we're doing as well. So yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's as I'm listening to these, you know, questions or agenda points or whatever, just what's sitting with me so strongly is the fractal, you know, like on that second point about how it's in a way it's like your community has got something to offer others. I'm thinking about the way that your community is a person, you know, like there's a kind of singular identity somehow, and that in any group of people in that particular configuration, each person has their own distinctive thing to offer, you know, that and it takes a bit of discovery work to figure out what that is, like what's my part here, and you go to the next group and it kind of reconfigures again. So there's that level of like, okay, you've got 30 people, or yeah, maybe even it's 150 people that all have this, you have this coherence around a set of practices. I mean, yeah, definitely that will be helpful to, yeah, I mean, I think I'm making a role for myself. Sometimes I don't even know what the word is. Sometimes I call myself like a librarian or something, or like sitting in the switch room, like connecting. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, you're one of those. So like, if I can know what's the personality of your collective identity, then I can make the introductions, and it's like it's really good to know that you've got that.
Yeah.
I call that work reconditioning. Like you've been built one way, and we need you to be adapted for this other way. And the good thing about that as well is my brain immediately spins off into like, oh, there's business models around that, right? Like around programs that you've been describing, coaching and training programs and things, and learning journeys. And like, if you can, it's exciting for me to imagine a kind of offering that you can make where other networks can come through, and they'd be the sort of like the first customers, as it were, to go through that. And I'm sure at Inspiral, which is my home base, I'm sure there's tons of us that have got a lot to learn and would be interested. But the fractal's really with me because, like you're saying about the first question, how to maintain intimacy and coherence and depth when there's 5 times as many people. And I just keep going down the fractal thing, from, like, how does, if you think of the Dunbar number, it's not like you have you and then 150 nodes all connected at the same depth, right? Like the 150 is broken down into family groups and cousins and second cousins. And like, when we think of like traditional kinship, we've got a language for navigating between the different, we know that a second cousin is further away than a cousin, than a sibling, than a partner, like there's a kind of structure in our language and a kind of common sense. We've got rituals, we've got everything to say like, okay, there's a difference. We're part of the same extended family, but there's a difference. And I feel like some of the reconditioning work that I've been pushing on is just to get people thinking in those terms of kinship, and that you shouldn't expect that 150 people are going to have the same sense of relationship to each other, but people do expect that. Like it's so common that there's, I was writing about it last week, that someone will arrive into a space like this for the first time, or like maybe they've had a few loops on this, but this one is really distinctive. Like, these are my people, and have this honeymoon, and then like really crash heavily when they realize that the group's not actually there for them later when they need them. It's like I felt like I was really connected and I really belonged here, but then I fell through the cracks somehow. Like that can be really disillusioning. And I think that happens because there's not enough of this granularity in the kinship. That's like the difference between being a cousin and being a nephew and being a sibling. So with the work I'm currently doing with Inspiral, where we've got there's like the home base in New Zealand. Inspiral comes from that place, and wouldn't exist without that place. But more than half of the well, no, not more than half, about half of the like most committed and engaged people live outside of New Zealand now. And it's been that way it's been growing in that direction for a long time. And so we've got this puzzle of like, how do we move from a place-based thing to a global thing? And it's been at an awkward halfway stage for a long time. And my partner, Nati, and I are anchoring an experiment here in Europe to go, well, can we at least put some kind of container around the European region and start facilitating stuff that you've been describing? We're doing similar kind of activity. And I don't know what's the right way to do it. This is the discovery, but my instinct is really just, what are the conditions for the cruise? Like, what do we need for great cruise to form here? And it seems like there's some modeling required. I really do believe in role modeling, like that you've got a couple of relationships. And I was really glad as soon as you started talking about a co-founder, it's like, in my view, it's like the relationship is doing the hosting more than either of you individuals, right? It's like the way that you interact with each other, the way that you share the space, the way that I can just imagine, like how you, how you support each other, how you criticize each other with love, all these sorts of things. Like that's what sets the tone of like, this is the kind of relationship that we're, okay, it's not complete, but this is direction that we want to grow in, and we're going to call that forth from your relationships as well. So I really do sense that there is a need for some of these core relationships in the middle, and then that they yeah, as you've gone from 2 to 10, and then the 10 to the 30, and then the 30 to the 150, it's like kind of everyone in that system needs to start taking on that that role of being the model a little bit, you know, and maybe not taking responsibility for the whole, but at least taking responsibility for your crew, at least for one conversation, you know, like having that turn. So like one of the crews I'm in at the moment, Nati called it together. There's 6 of us that are kind of very slowly exploring the idea of a shared housing project. And she knows all the people, so she's kind of the natural source of that. And we had a few conversations just to sense like, yeah, we actually do want to get to know each other more, and there's something interesting here. And then she very rapidly said, you know, I don't have what this thing needs, you know, it can't come from me, it needs to come from us, and started rotating the facilitation. So now, like, I'm reasonably experienced with doing that stuff, but the other 4 people in the group are really not, and they're taking their turn. So it's like, you've done it for 3 weeks and you're doing it for 3 weeks, and now we're on to the 3rd person, and like giving each other feedback about how the hosting is going, and just introducing the concept of hosting, you know, that's actually a role that yeah, a lot of people don't fully notice until it's their job to do it, and then you're like, oh god, right, there's so many components to it, right? So we're really in a way just doing a kind of capacity development on who can hold these kind of groups. And maybe, you know, maybe what will happen is that there's a bunch of people that never really, it might not be their long-term calling to hold a group, you know, we don't expect that, but definitely our energy at the moment is biased towards that. Like, how do we activate those people that have that kind of capacity? And this is why I'm talking about the fractal thing, because it's like, well, within my crew, I want everyone to be able to host a crew, and then within the congregation the same. But then I really do think, well, at least in my framework, you know, like the congregation is limited to the Dunbar, more or less, you know, like there'll be ways to stretch it or whatever, but it's around that, it's in that order of magnitude. And so the job is not to make the perfect community and then get everyone into it. It's like, we just need lots and lots of these communities all over the world. You know, that there are places, there's so many people that I'm having conversations with every week now that need this kind of place to go. And I need to have an address book that has, well, there's 50 options, you know, which one suits you best? And they're not there yet, you know, they're not robust enough yet to have a public door that you can go and knock on. But we need them to be there. And so it's like, the reason I emphasize that so hard, I think, is because once you've got something nice going, you don't want to go off and start a new thing. You want to stay with where the good energy is. You know, there's a kind of gravity that holds you together. And it's like, no, you actually have to do the cell division and spread out. So yeah, I mean, how do you actually make that bridge from 30 to 100 plus? That's just my instinctive position, you know, is which one of these, you know, are there at least 5 of those people or 10 of those people now that are willing to, that have got the capacity to hold a small group for a 6-month process or something like that? And maybe they practice with each other because there's already that sense of, we know each other. There's that familiarity. And then you can start throwing new people in, you know, and know that it's not just going to be on the core team to support their arrival, their onboarding, but that you've got it distributed around.
Yeah, that's really helpful to think about. We had definitely been talking already about eventually having some kind of a, I'm just going to use the phrase teacher training. But, you know, I guess the vision there was sort of like we've got somebody on our calls in Sweden and, you know, Bahrain and where else do people come from? Netherlands, Greece, you know, so to the degree that there are individuals in different locations around the world who are all sort of part of this group of 30, and that some, you know, percentage of those people might eventually want to hold some kind of similar space locally, we've felt it would be important to provide those people with kind of training and support. right, to be able to do that. So what I'm getting from what you're sharing is that there might actually be kind of a middle step to that, which would happen sooner and be in some ways a little less formal, but also potentially more experiential, like kind of just like throw people in and be like, see how you do, we'll give you some feedback. So yeah, that's a really interesting idea. And I feel like I know there are people in the kind of core 10 who I think would step into that fairly easily. I mean, one of the good things, I guess, is that we tend to draw folks who are often like trained coaches or consultants or trainers or facilitators. And so they've got that kind of like capacity to hold space already in them. So that appears to be a strength in this context. So yeah, that's helpful. And you also mentioned like the business model piece, that that's actually another big area where that's like a very important, urgent question for us right now, in this process of like, we've got there's enough going on that it's requiring a lot of energy, right? And there's enough momentum that it feels like it could grow. But we need that kind of like infrastructure to be able to support it and keep it sustainable. So what does that look like? That's another actually really big area that we could use some guidance on at the moment.
So just from, it's really important for me to distinguish my expertise, which is like, I've got great experience with one community, which is quite a different thing from how does that reproduce into other contexts, and which one of these lessons that would, like which ones are unique to that place and those people, and which ones are actually universal. Like, I don't know yet. And I'm trying to pick up more now as I'm getting more networked into other communities and see what kind of common patterns arise. But just from my own experience, the journey that we went through with Inspiral was basically starting as a agency, freelancers collective kind of thing, where there was one legal company legally owned by the founder of Inspiral, and he was just really generous about recruiting a lot of people into it. They had all sorts of different skills, and then there were kind of people out there just farming opportunities and going, hey, I've got this thing, can we assemble a team and squad and we'll just go and do this? And there was a lot of fun, a lot of learning in that. And there was a kind of baseline assumption that any work that you win through that process, you'd share 20% of the income to the collective. So that became like it's like an internal taxation thing, right? And that can fund paying for someone's time, or like pay for a sales team or whatever you want to do with that. Pay for retreats, things like that. And it's a fun stage, but we definitely grew out of it, and we got to this point now, which is much more like, there's this big social fabric, which has the kinship structures, like I said, people are closer and further apart from each other, and these pockets and these densities, and there's a lot of terrain of that relationship field. And then on the economic side, there's more like many small, distinct legal entities that each have their own little niche. And some of them, so the Harm is one of them. So that's me and Nati and Ezra from Inspiral, the three of us. And now there's a fourth person that's sort of like on their way in. And we'd love to grow to, 8 or 9 consultants maybe. And then you've got Greater Than, who, from an external sort of business perspective, they're our competitors. They're doing a very similar thing in the world. But because they're part of the family, it's like, well, we're actually trying to understand what are our distinctive strengths and offerings, and like, how do we share the wealth around in a constructive way, which means we actually have to have good relationships with each other and stay in communication and go like, hey, here's one that, well, we have to be generous with each other, right? And say, hey, I think you'd be better suited for this job than I would, and so on. And that just takes the maturity of relationships to better do that, and the proactiveness to anticipate, oh, this actually could be, I've got a tension here that I need to talk to you about, whatever. But now, yeah, there's lots of small companies basically, and it's quite fluid whether you would recruit, like if you wanted to grow your team, it's fluid whether you recruit directly from the community or from just the wider world. And there's a kind of vague, yeah, there's an overlap on the Venn diagram between who's in the Inspiral community and who's working in the Inspiral companies. They're kind of like, they're not perfectly aligned, you know, there's, for lots of different reasons, there's a kind of blur there. And that definitely feels more resilient to me, to have multiple distinct cell boundaries, and that no one has the expectation that they can join my company. You know, it's kind of like, it's a more intimate boundary there, that's like, that everyone kind of knows that we've got this particular thing that we're focused on, and next year we'll probably bring in another 2 or 3 people and we'll be getting to know them. And there's this, I guess in a way, there's a very informal kind of recruitment process going on, I guess, as we get to know each other and so on. But there's no expectation that we're going to have to provide for everyone. And there's no expectation that everyone else in the community has to think that what we're doing is a good idea, or, you know, like it's like, it's our own private business. And that really works for us. The mental model for me, it's like going from a commune to a neighborhood. And in the neighborhood, a lot of the entities are just going to look like atomic families, you know, like they're just going to be these small bounded things. But the interesting thing is the sharing that's happening across the fences.
What, just help me understand, like what are you using that metaphor to describe? Like what was the commune? And I think I understand the neighborhood is all of these kind of separate but vaguely related business entities that are part of an ecosystem, but not necessarily, they're relativly independent from each other. So what was the commune?
Well, the commune was like, let's get everyone into this one thing, and we'll have to sort of manage. You know, there's like a single point of ownership, whether that's one person or, you know, you distribute it, whatever. But still, that there's like that there's only kind of one mode of governance.
The Inspiral brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we all have to, because we all have to care about it. We always have to patrol each other's kind of quality and how they're using the brand and so on. And
right. Yeah, I heard you talk about that. I did notice that. What? Yeah. What do I want to ask? Like, I feel like I have a question, but it's not coming to my mind enough to answer yet. Something about like how those independent entities, what do they share, I guess, is maybe part of the question. Like, what is that sharing that happens across the fences?
One of the things that's been really significant for me, the first one was working practices, I guess. Like the kind of thing that you get if you do a business incubator. And they're like, this is lean startup, this is agile, this is Kanban, this is, you know, like this is design thinking. Because people are quite happy to help each other out, that stuff just travels really fast around the community, like that. Different work practices. One of the guys just started using audio channels on Discord for co-working, so that you're not, you know, you have the experience of shared presence without actually being in a meeting. And it's like, oh, that's good to know. That's a thing. That's a useful thing, because, you know, it's like that stuff sparks through really quickly. And like for me, starting out with zero business experience and then arriving into this community with some ideas, it felt like the gem of, that kind of seed of my idea got wrapped around with all of this business common sense stuff that I didn't, it just arrived almost instantaneously. And then the other thing that's happening across the fences is it is like an extended flexible labor pool, so that when my last business, Lumio, like there were times where we got funding and then we recruited all these people and then we run out of money and we lose them all, but we don't lose them into the market. Most of them we just lose into the Inspiral cloud, and so they stick around. And so the investments that we're making in relationships and culture and knowledge and everything, like it stays within that bounded economy. And that's been really golden, actually. That makes a really big difference. It's the same cast of characters in different configurations. So the organizational memory is actually sticking around. And then there's a financial dimension. This, this is one of the things that's the most experimental, and we keep chopping and changing around. But like, all of these different ventures, they do contribute some of their money to the collective, and they're basically funding the community managers to create lots of opportunities for people to meet and hang out and do stuff.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. I'm mindful of our time. Probably
I can go a little over time, not a lot, but like I can go 10 minutes over if we need to.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, so as I said, part of my intention here was just to meet and connect, and I'm happy to hear that you're meeting a lot of other people, maybe, like me, like you, trying to do this stuff. So I guess one thing is, just to put our entry in your address book in case people come across your radar who you think would be a good fit for us, and to kind of understand more what that means. I would love to invite you to join one of our calls at some time, or I can just basically add you to our list if you're okay with that, and you'll get our weekly updates or whatever. But it would be really cool for me and my co-founder to be part of I'll just call it a community of practice of people who are like asking these questions and trying to work with these principles and practices, you know what I mean? So that, as you said in your podcast, not that we're necessarily trying to copy anybody's thing, but certainly to learn from what other people are doing, how they're failing and learning, and to whatever degree it makes sense, collaborating across boundaries to support each other. That could be really exciting and interesting as far as both supporting us in our own, leadership practice, but also just in terms of being plugged into that broader movement, So I don't know if anything concrete comes to mind for you with that, but I would love to just kind of plant that seed as a possibility.
Yeah, the place that I'm in is like, very happy to meet, like wanting to have this connection and understanding a little bit of who you are and what are you doing, and would love to join one of your calls and just get the flavor that way as well, the experience of it. And it was quite weird when I first published the Micro Solidarity blog. It just got way more reaction than anything I've ever written about before. It was just like this kind of instantaneous resonance. And it made me sort of reevaluate, okay, what's my role to play here? And I have this kind of grumpiness about me, I guess, like this defensiveness of, I'm not really that interested in spending a lot of time with people that like the idea, that's not interesting. What's interesting is people that are actually committed to the action and the long slog and the difficult relationship stresses, and then, and they're going through it. And so for this phase, I haven't been like recruiting a lot of people and trying to draw them in and be like, hey, this is great and you should do it with me, it's going to be so awesome. It's been more like, just trying to filter out who's actually got that degree of commitment that they're doing a thing that's interesting. And so there's a community of practice in waiting I would say, so
Mm.
like there's a Lumio group that we have. I can send you the link. And in that group is just, there's probably, I don't know, I think there's kind of representatives from 15 or 20 different communities who are really engaged in their thing, and they're people that I respect as like peers. And then there's another 100 people that are interested. Maybe it's not such a high priority, or they're not so experienced, or I just don't know who they are, but they're just kind of hanging out there. And there's not a lot of action there. There's just like a sort of like very, very gentle simmer. And I've been I think it's on me to activate that. I'm pretty sure maybe someone else can do it, but I think it's my job. And I've just been trying to get my house in order so that I can free up the time to do that. And so like part of the experiment this year, Nati and I got quite, the COVID pause. I really, it really shook my confidence as far as like my sense of what, like my business sensibility, I guess, like that we're building a business together and we know what we're selling and we know who's buying it and it makes sense or whatever. Then the pandemic came along and I really felt like disrupted and like, I don't know if this is even, does anyone even care about what we're doing anymore? It feels like a different world. So I kind of lost the direction for a bit. And what came out of that chaos was really mostly Nati's idea, what we called the Micro Solidarity Practice Program. And that's just like, we did, I think, 6 of them this year now or something. And they're cohorts of like 30 or 40 people over a few weeks. And you get together and you do some practices that are really just hands-on, experiential, like how do you do collective intelligence? How do you do problem solving? How do you do emotional intelligence, intimacy, relationship stuff, and just practicing with this cohort. And so there's like 150 people or something that went through that this year. And they're also kind of in the field waiting to be activated. And that felt really good doing that work, because it's like there's a business model. People are paying to come to the program, and it's like it means that I can commit my time. I can be a priority for me to do that work. So I'm sort of just waiting on what the next of that is going to be for next year. But in the very least, like I'll have you, I'll invite you in to be in this kind of waiting room a little bit, and we're not sure exactly what's going to come through. I mean, if you've got the energy for it, people have got different sort of personality types, but if you have the energy for documentation, I think that's really golden at this stage of just saying like, hey, we're putting our flag in the sand here and saying we're doing a thing and this is what we're doing. Like, I'm especially interested at the moment just in practices, like what are the specific practices people feel that they can open source that are valuable to others. Like what kind of activities does it make sense to do in crews? How do you form crews? How do you sort of manage them? That stuff has been really interesting. And then like the last thing I wrote was about how do we actually do financial sharing within a crew and stuff like that. So it's if you're kind of bent in that direction, that's really helpful to just be publishing your own resources so that people can start to get to know each other a little bit. But yeah, beyond that, it's more like you'll be waiting on me to actually make an invitation that's appealing, but it'll happen at some stage.
Yeah, the documentation thing is interesting. Do you, how do you do that? Or what would you, what might you suggest as a kind of useful way to approach that? I mean, I know you write a lot on Medium. Is that kind of your main channel for that?
That's been the Medium stuff is like it's one layer abstracted from the documentation. It's like really storytelling and trying to frame my own story in a way where I think it's going to have some resonance with others. For me, the documentation is more clinical in that it's just like these are the run sheets that we used in this. We use, do you know the TheoryU case clinic process?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's an example of just like, I really believe in the case clinic process as a format that just works with no special facilitation, with no like amazing skills. You just run through the steps and it generates connection and insight. And so I'm like pointing people at that and saying, if you don't know what to do, just do that. If you've got 5 people, do 5 case clinics. And then on your 6th conversation, have a retrospective about how was that and what do you want to do differently? And that's a pretty good starter, like to kickstart the self-organizing. So those kind of things I find really valuable, just very concrete, tested practices. And these kind of conversations, I've been recording a lot of these conversations and just throwing them up in the Lumia group as well, for the people that have the curiosity to just be in the discovery, you know, and to trace that. I don't know how you feel about that with this one.
For you to post it in the Lumio group, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm open to that. That sounds good. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about other conversations that I've had recently or am planning to have soon. That could be good documentation. We've been recording stuff mostly for our internal use, like with this one, you know, so that other people on the team can watch it. But it's interesting to think about that as a potentially like sort of more outward facing resource as well. Yeah, cool. All right, man. Well, I'll let you go, but I would love to just stay in touch. Yeah, happy to be on the list, or you know, in the back of your mind for whatever comes up that might be interesting. I'll go ahead and add you to our list as well, so you can catch those messages. Yeah, I think overall, I would love to just sort of offer and request that we kind of just keep each other in mind and use each other as a resource in whatever way feels helpful. And just keep kind of, yeah, like I would be very happy to consider you just as another sort of thought partner out in the world, who's on this learning journey as well, you know?
Yeah, I'm up for that. I'm pleased to be invited. I'm sort of, I feel like my capacity is like, yeah, like I say, bring me into one or two of your events so I can get a feel for it, and happy to have a conversation with you, or you know, co-founder, or whoever else, every couple of months, sort of thing. You know, like having this sort of touch point of like that I get a feel for how you're developing and what kind of connections make sense. And then beyond that, yeah, like the thing about publishing documentation is about trying to create a surface area where I'm not the bottleneck, you know, like where there's people can learn from each other in a peer-to-peer way. Like I say, I have to actually activate that for it to really happen. But in the meantime, leaving, you know, having a digital footprint allows for people to meet and connect and share their ideas as well.
Is it accurate that because of your role in Inspiral, you now are a kind of like attractor point for other people who are like me, sort of looking at Inspiral and being like, well, that's really cool, I want to learn more, and end up talking to you like this?
There's a bit of that. There's a few of us though. Like we take it in cycles, you know, like who's got the capacity for a while, and it's really like at the moment it's really energizing. I'm excited. I feel good talking with you. And then after, you know, 10 of these, it's like, okay, need to go and digest for a while and focus inwards, and then someone else.
Yeah. No, listen, I really get that, and I mean, it's something we're constantly navigating ourselves in terms of both, like, you know, I have a 5-year-old kid and I've got a part-time job and I've got this, that, the other thing. So even as the co-founder, it's a question of, you know, bandwidth and balance. And then also in terms of being respectful of other people's time that, you know, are like all these people who we now consider part of our team, but, you know, we can't pay them and they've got jobs and family, you know. So yeah, I think for me it feels really important that whatever we create in these experiments come from a place of like as much ease and joy and spaciousness as possible, so that we're not just repeating the sort of like hustle and grind and burnout culture that got us here in the first place, you know.
Spaciousness is like one of my keywords. That's essential.
Yeah. So we welcome and appreciate your engagement to whatever degree it feels nourishing and spacious for you, and also totally respect whatever boundaries and needs you might have to keep yourself spacious. So yeah. Right
well,
on,
cool.
man.
I look forward to the next time. See where we've moved on to.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your work and your thought leadership and your being available for other folks to, use you as a resource. It's really cool.
Well, I'm grateful that you're doing the work, so I can just sit back and kind of talk about it and think about it.
Yeah, well, as you said, for now it's enlivening and it's fun and it's worth the slog, and
Yeah.
I feel committed to it for the long haul. And I also know that it's gonna have its ups and downs, and it's like, I don't know, man. It's like, that's why you need community. That's why you can't do this stuff alone.
Yeah.
You got to be with people who are in it with you. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you again, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah,
I
me
really
too.
appreciate it. Yeah. Okay.
Enjoy your day. Good to meet you, Michael.
And bye.